Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm Isabel Araujo, a member of the CFA Society San Francisco and part of our member Programming Advisory Council. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today, which is about sustainable and regenerative portfolios. Our speakers today are Rini Greenfield, Justina Lai, and we have Jesse Simmons as our moderator. A quick item to note before we start, you will be muted for the event, so we encourage you to type questions in the Q&A box. We monitor the questions closely and endeavor to have as many answered as possible. This event will also be recorded, which we share the replay. Now, I'd like to introduce the speakers. Rini Greenfield is a founding general partner of Rethink Food, and former co-founder of Adaptive Management, which is a Tiger Management in-house portfolio. Rethink Food is an impact investor and helps support the production, availability, and demand for healthier and more sustainable food. Rini has over a decade of experience investing in technology and consumer companies, focusing on sectors that were at the tipping point of disruption through innovation, to then focus on companies with the social impact lens. Justina Lai is Chief Impact Officer at Wetherby Asset Management and Laird, Norton Wealth Management, where she wears many hats, leading the firm's impact investing strategy, as well as the integration of impact across its stakeholder groups and investment management, client service, and operational functions. Throughout her career, she worked at several notable firms. She focused on global impact investment strategies, and she also serves now on boards of institutions that foster a more equitable society. Our moderator, Jesse Simmons, helps lead the investment research team and advisory practice at CapShift. He previously served as senior investment analyst and impact advisor at Align Impact. Jess began his career at the World Bank, where he focused on development effectiveness in sub-Saharan Africa, and subsequently worked at Dalberg Global Development Advisors, a mission-driven consulting firm, bringing innovation to development. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jesse to start this exciting conversation.
Thanks, Isabel, and thanks everyone for being with us. Excited about this conversation as well. I'm going to touch on a couple of big picture goals in this conversation. We are hoping to talk about food and agriculture, sustainable regenerative food and agriculture from an investment perspective, talk about how this is applicable to a range of different asset holders with different type of impact goals, different types of investment goals, different portions of their portfolio that they might be looking to activate for impact in sustainable food and agriculture. We'll talk about some of the different corners of this market and different trends and dynamics in the food and agriculture space, and then some of the how-to. So as an advisor, how to go about integrating impact in food and agriculture into a client's portfolio strategy, all the way from some of the initial conversations to setting goals to sourcing product and ultimately building and allocating portfolios to delight underlying clients, asset holders who are interested in this space, and ultimately drive compelling impact for people, planet, and animals. Isabel already did introductions of our wonderful panelists today. So we'll take our introduction time to go into a little bit of your particular role at your business and how particularly regenerative sustainable food and ag fits in, and what brought you to this space in the first place. Rini, we'll start with you if you want to kick us off.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Rini Greenfield. So my whole world is actually food and agriculture. I came from a technology generalist background, and due to a host of circumstances, I saw that there was this opportunity that felt very untapped and early, but large in digitizing and really creating a much more sustainable food and agricultural system through driving technology and efficiencies. So my background came from the public markets and growth stage, but this is really a young and growing industry. So now Rethink Food is investing in early stage technology companies that are really driving systemic change in food and agriculture for human and planetary health.
Thanks, Rini. Justina, would love to hear from you. How sustainable food and ag fits in, what brought you to this space in the first place?
Yeah, I would say sustainable food and ag is sort of one focus area amongst many that is part of my remit and areas that I look at in general and issue areas that we focus on here. But I would say I have sort of a personal interest in the space because I spent my summer between my first and second year of business school actually investing in agricultural enterprises in Rwanda. And that was a really formative moment for me in sort of understanding the intersectionality that's present within food and ag. So the fact that it certainly is, since food production is responsible for a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, the recognition that there's, a role for food and ag to play in terms of climate solutions, but also given my experience in Rwanda, understanding the gender equity component of it, the economic inclusion component of it, land justice, food security, health, racial justice. So just the confluence of various issue areas that come together within food and ag, I think, is part of the reason why I find this space so interesting. And I would say, how it fits in for Wetherby and Laird Norton is really what our clients are asking for and demanding, and how we can meet client needs on that front.
Great. And so as you've gotten a sense, we're privileged to have both asset allocator, Rini, someone who runs a fund focused on regenerative and sustainable food and agriculture technology, very close to the underlying market, and then someone who sits in an advisory role, Justina, helping clients and asset holders sort of build portfolios and integrate food and agriculture for impact. At CapShift, we sit somewhere in between. We work managing a large database of impact investment opportunities, many of them which have a food and agriculture focus. And then we support financial advisors and philanthropic institutions to go about accessing that sort of rich landscape of impact investment opportunities and going through the process of building those portfolios and bringing to clients. So Justina, from there, I'd love to dive in a little bit more. Take us through the process of going about working with underlying clients. How does this come up in the first place? How do you navigate those conversations? How do you lead towards them, receive them? And then what does it look like from a portfolio construction standpoint? How do you think about integrating these impact areas and this sort of rich landscape of opportunities into a portfolio?
Yeah, so at Wetherby and Laird Norton, we really we build custom portfolios for our clients, and that's custom portfolios not only in terms of impact but also in terms of risk return and other sort of objectives that our clients might have for their portfolios. And really we do so because what we're trying to do is optimize for all the various goals that our clients have, and recognizing that impact is one objective amongst many. Risk, return, liquidity, spending needs, legacy, philanthropy. And really, we want to ensure that we're striking the right balance there. And so it really, first and foremost, starts with our clients' objectives and what they're trying to achieve. And I would say within food and ag, for some of our clients, it is sort of a component of a broader theory of change that they might have, for example, related to climate change or racial justice. And for others, it is sort of their main focus. And depending on the client and their goals, we will sort of approach it in a slightly different way. So, for some clients, as I mentioned, it's much more narrowly focused. And in that case, we will usually try and identify parts of the portfolio where we can have very direct targeted impact within that specific theory of change around food and ag, and then where in other parts of their portfolio we want to take a broader based approach, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of intersectionality here. There's a lot of different ways to approach the food and ag space. When clients say they're interested in food and ag, they often aren't aware of all the intricacies and all of these other areas that could touch upon it. So we often talk about, those next concentric circles of impact out from that very targeted bullseye. And ultimately, we want to educate them on understanding that a lot of these issue areas are really inextricably linked.
Could you give some examples maybe of some of the what that looks like when you're talking about part of a larger theory of change, individual, like selecting particular opportunities? What does that look like for those client conversations? Any aha moments that you feel like we'll get to implementation a little bit later, but in bringing those initial conversations, where are you finding your clients particularly delighted, particularly interested, learning something new?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of clients come, they think automatically about industries and sectors, and what we try to shift them into. So they might come and say, I want to invest in regenerative agriculture. And in their minds, regenerative agriculture is only the food production component. It is literally the land ownership or the land leasing, and the act of growing food. And I think there's a real opportunity to reframe that conversation first around understanding what they're really concerned about, what they're really hoping to address, what social and environmental challenges they're really concerned about, and reframing around actual impact objectives rather than sectors or industries, because there's a lot of different ways to address a client's objectives across sectors and industries. And even within food and ag specifically, again, they may articulate first and foremost regenerative agriculture and think food production, but we can sort of we have an opportunity to reframe and talk about the entire value chain. And it really, what you find once you start delving into these conversations with clients is, getting beyond that surface level of what they might say up front, is they're actually really concerned about, for example, who owns that land. Is it BIPOC owned, or is it women owned? They're really interested in the labor on those farms. And then you move away from that and you say, well, there's other parts of the value chain. You can have a food being produced sustainably or regeneratively, but then who's buying that food? How is that food being processed and distributed? And you very quickly start to be able to open up that aperture, which enables you to develop a much more diversified approach, which, unless a client has zero financial goals for their investment portfolios, which is not usually the case, it's very helpful to be able to take some of that broaden that aperture.
Great.
And just to add on to what Justina is saying, the food system is so inextricably linked to all of its segments. You can't talk about regenerative ag without considering even, materials and the pollution and the carbon that emits when it's turned into waste. So as a fund, we made a decision to invest in the entire food system from soil to shelf for that reason. We think that you need to solve for supply chain, you need to solve for seeds and fertilizers and inputs and labor, and you need to solve for distribution, and also for human health and the nutritional access, in order to solve this big food system. And you can't really separate one from the other.
You're teasing the next question, Rini. That's helpful. So take us closer to some of the opportunities, some of the subsectors you're seeing the most interesting product in. You manage a venture fund. You are at the forefront of identifying innovative products in this sustainable and regenerative ag space. What jumps out as some of the more exciting examples?
Well, there's definitely certain subsectors that we've identified that are high growth and high impact. Our fund really looks at things with a lens of computation and we say we're digitizing the food system, whatever that means. But an example would be in agronomy, traits. So traits in plants are an age-old thing. We have for centuries been breeding plants, and that is effectively trying to breed them to have more favorable traits, whether it's bigger produce or have more, be taller, be shorter, whatever is favorable in order to yield more. Now with climate change, we need to have traits like drought resistance. And it takes, or it used to take 5 to 10 years to develop a trait. And we can't afford to wait that long anymore. So now we have the luxury of looking at the genetic code of plants and sort of computationally testing, and we can test millions of permutation and accelerate that breeding from 5 to 10 years to 1 to 2 years. So we have solutions there, and those yield better, and those are sustainable. And that's an area that we're extremely excited about because it is a win-win for everyone. We need to produce more with less land. There are lots of ways that we can kind of crack that nut, but one way is to yield more with fewer inputs and less land.
Extremely helpful. You can see the both financial and impact outputs of a company working in helping to breed and accelerate the breeding of more efficient plants. Any other core constraints that come to mind that you're seeing innovation sort of overcoming? You mentioned land input as a core constraint that we hear about all the time. Any other areas to bring us in on?
Well, the area that everyone loves to talk about, I believe, is alternative proteins. So there are a whole host of problems with the animal agriculture industry that range from sustainability and climate related, as well as human health related and animal ethics related. The food system accounts for 31% of greenhouse gas emissions. Animal agriculture accounts for 14% of greenhouse gas emissions. They estimated something like 60 to 80% of the plants that we are growing are actually feeding the animals that we slaughter. It is an incredible tax on the system. And we're finding alternatives. There are definitely 3 clear technologies that we've identified: plant-based, synthetic biology, and cultivated meat, that are phenomenal alternatives to traditional animal agriculture. And now it is our job as investors to fund that innovation so it can scale, because there is no green premium for food. We need to meet the market rates for animal agriculture for us to drive adoption. And I promise you, McDonald's does not want to go slaughter cows to make burgers if they can grow it in a bioreactor next to their store. There's consistency, it is clean, and it is inexpensive and scalable and right there. So the solution is in front of us. We just have to kind of fund the innovation to get there. And if you look at alternative proteins versus, for example, renewable energy, it is very, very underfunded. And if we can get to 11% alternative protein adoption, which is I think the conservative estimate out of the most recent BCG study, that we can get to by 2030, we will reduce a gigaton of carbon from the atmosphere, and we will reclaim land the size of the UK, a small but mighty country.
Thanks for sharing that, Rini. We can see, clearly the carbon and methane implications of this transition, as well as the animal welfare implications of such a transition. Seeing some of the plant-based alternatives already on the shelf in markets, and looking forward to seeing more of the cellular grown. For those who are less familiar, if you could take just a moment to talk a little bit more about that process of innovating, funding innovation on the cellular ag side, and sort of what those core constraints are, that where you're seeing opportunities for funding, bringing down the cost, accelerating the efficiency of bringing cellular agriculture to stores.
Yeah, cellular agriculture is basically growing animal cells, muscle and fat, in a bioreactor rather than in the animal itself. And this is technology that we have had through the pharmaceutical industry and the biotech industry for a long time. But now we need to scale it to consumer scale. And that is a challenge. We right now are nowhere near the price point that we need to be, largely due to the fact that the medium in which the cells grow in is extremely expensive. And so we need to focus on how we can get the nutrients to grow these cells more cheaply so that we can meet kind of the cost curve of traditional animal agriculture. And theoretically, the scale up is there, but we need to invest in all of those kind of steps along the way so that we can hit the price point.
Thanks for sharing, Rini. We'll pull back to the asset allocator lens now and go back to you, Justina. You mentioned, obviously, we're going deep on venture capital and one particular sub-asset class where we're seeing a lot of innovative interest. Huge market potential, young companies, a lot of innovation. As you think about diversification, was the word you left us with last. As you think about diversifying across overall portfolio, can you share some of the sort of asset classes where you're seeing the most richness and opportunity set? And maybe without disclosing names, some examples of some of the funds that you're seeing sort of most applicable across a diversified portfolio?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you can find some opportunities across most asset classes. The depth of that universe or the breadth of that universe, of course, differs. And would say, the approach that is taken and the depth of the impact, I think, would also differ across asset classes. So, within public equities, I would say there are absolutely thematically oriented funds out there where food and ag or sustainable ag is either the core focus or is one of the focus areas within a broader sustainable thematic portfolio. And typically we would use those kinds of strategies more as a satellite exposure to a more diversified core. And then I would say, always within public equities, when it comes to impact, is the addition of shareholder advocacy, so real stewardship of your capital as well. And we see a lot of activity in terms of shareholder advocacy around issues like factory farming, antibiotics in the meat supply of non-medically or medically important antibiotics being used in animals, and then of course animal welfare. And I would say, unsurprisingly, within the public markets, the technologies that are in different stages of their development will show up. So in public equities, you'll see much more, fully commercialized and scaled technologies, ag and irrigation technology, food production and distribution, food retailers, restaurants, et cetera. I think one area that's a little more challenging would be the sort of public fixed income. So the bond space. There are green bonds and bonds that finance rural communities, and sovereign and multilateral organizations that issue green bonds, but that may include financing for food and ag projects. But I'd say that's a more challenging area to find real opportunities. And in all of those cases, I'm not aware of a single sort of a concentrated bond fund that focuses solely on that sort of, solely within food and ag. It's definitely part of a more diversified approach towards green bonds or sustainable fixed income. Within the private debt space, there's more opportunities. Of course, there's sort of the CDFIs that have been funding fair trade food businesses, particularly in food deserts. So, thinking about access to fresh food, as well as those that might be more focused on, private debt opportunities, more focused on livelihoods within the emerging markets. And there's often, intersectionality there around climate resilience and a gender lens, since women, particularly in the emerging markets, are comprise the vast majority of the labor within the agricultural production. I think the most obvious, setting aside the venture capital, since we've already spoken a lot about that, and Rini is the real expert, obviously there's a lot of opportunities there, but probably the most obvious opportunity, again, going back to what comes to mind immediately for clients, are really the real assets opportunities. And historically, that's been really concentrated more in sort of the production component of it and really focus on conversion of conventional agriculture to more organic or regenerative practices. And there's a lot of value in incorporating this aspect into the real asset space, because of course real assets really provide a nice inflation hedge. There's downside protection in the form of investment in a hard asset, and for those who are non-taxable investors, the benefits of the current yield that come from real assets, and in this case food production as well.
Great. Yeah, I think that really resonates, Justina. Some of the lenses that we might put on it as well at CapShift is thinking about transition of land for healthier soils and healthier climate, as well as livelihoods of those farming the land or stewarding the land, as well as sort of beneficiaries. So access to food, access to healthy food in different areas. And again, transcending domestic markets, as well as international and emerging markets, and just many of these opportunities achieving all of those different goals across beneficiary groups and outcomes. Justina, as you think about bringing these opportunities to across diversified portfolios or across clients who are looking for a particular target or bullseye area, how do you think about the trade-offs of market rate risk-adjusted opportunities stepping off of the risk-adjusted return continuum to have some outsized impact level? How do you think about that in terms of what's available in the opportunity set, and then navigating those trade-offs with clients themselves?
Yeah, I think in terms of the navigating with clients, I think that's the benefit of being able to build custom portfolios, is then we are able to optimize depending on the relative prioritization of their goals. And so we absolutely have clients who say, well, I want to have as much impact as possible, as broadly and deeply as possible, without compromising in any way, shape, or form the financial parameters of a portfolio. And I do think it is possible to weave in, food and ag as direct exposures in certain areas like venture and real assets, whereas in other parts of the portfolio, it will be much of a broader based approach where it may be a component of a larger strategy or a satellite exposure, as I mentioned, to a much more diversified core. So with those clients, that's more of the approach that we would take, is to really be much more pragmatic about the way in which we incorporate it wherever we can, while meeting all of the other goals for their investment portfolios. But then to your point, Jesse, we do have some clients who say, I absolutely want to do this. I'm actually okay with this portion of my portfolio, prioritizing the impact and the very specific impact that I want to have, with the financial returns as really a secondary consideration. And in that case, we will and can get much more targeted, much more illiquid, much more concentrated than you would typically see in a more diversified portfolio. And I think the real catalytic opportunities that we're seeing, or those that still require some level of catalytic capital to support them, are the opportunities that perhaps are more focused on racial and social justice. And so we've seen a lot of interest from clients and a lot of emerging opportunities within the space around BIPOC-led or BIPOC-led food organizations and or BIPOC-owned farms. And I think that clearly is a really important sort of racial justice component to it, since many of these farmers have farmed the land for a very long time without being able to share in the value creation of that. So, I would say that's probably one of the areas that we're seeing a lot of interest from clients, as well as emerging opportunities, but still highly more of a catalytic investment opportunity than one that can yet deliver risk-adjusted rates of return.
I just wanted to follow on because we also see the benefits of how a more efficient food system positively impacts communities that are at risk, because a more efficient food system, and by food system in this case, I'm specifically speaking to regenerative practices of growing food, but also traceability in the supply chain, so that we can efficiently transport the food from the source to the consumer. the more efficient we are there and the more regenerative we are with our growing practices, the more nutritious our food is, the less food we waste. And so ultimately that should amount to less expensive food. And that disproportionately benefits communities that are at risk, that are often BIPOC communities. They are unfortunately very often the victim of us being really, really good as a country at distributing calories, but not at distributing nutrition. So we really think there's a great racial equity component to solving food.
Agreed. I think the intersectionality of food and agriculture resonates here. Right? We have, whether you're coming for the climate, whether you're coming for the soil, whether you're coming for farmers or BIPOC underrepresented communities, there's often a solution in food and agriculture. Rini, as you're seeing in your portfolio in the sectors that you're looking into, any examples that come to mind of innovating or providing solutions around this sort of justice component of the sort of impact wheel within food and ag?
Yeah, I think the justice component is probably most prevalent when we think of categories like food traceability and food waste, because ultimately that leads to, as I said, a lower priced product. We waste 30 to 40% of our food in the food system, and that's even throughout the entire process. So we waste 30% on farm, in supply chain, at retail, at home. It's pretty bad. And name me another mature, high functioning industry that absorbs 30% waste, is okay with it, and just passes it on to the consumer. It doesn't exist. So if we can solve those problems and create efficiencies, traceabilities, reduce supply chain, not ship our asparagus from Chile, but rather grow it in a greenhouse that is metro adjacent, then we will find ultimately that our food system will be able to pass on that benefit to the consumer, and all of the stakeholders will be able to benefit economically from profiting from revenue that they otherwise would not have had because it was wasted. It's truly a win-win-win, but it requires technology to be able to trace and monitor.
Thanks for sharing, Rini. And thanks to folks who are putting questions in the Q&A box as we're talking. It's super helpful. We'll dive right into one of those right now, asking for more specific about ways to invest in this space, with the caveat that we won't be sharing sort of individual product names. Happy to talk a little bit more about what this looks like from an investment perspective. Maybe I'll jump in first and share one that we touched on, but maybe haven't spent as much time talking about, is sort of smallholder agriculture finance. Talk about intersectional, benefiting some of the sort of poorest rural farmers in the developing world, and sort of bridging hunger seasons, increasing incomes where incomes are the lowest. And then also facilitating a transfer to more sustainable agricultural practices, and improved soil health, improved resilience to climate events and climate change and changing climate. We're seeing a range of these different types of nonprofit funds. These funds typically require stepping off of the risk-adjusted return continuum and accepting a lower nominal return, though with a mitigated overall risk profile, often through portfolios, and that investors can sign up for 1, 2, 3 year notes, making loans to these nonprofit funds for low single-digit returns, and their capital goes directly to help sort of serving some of the least served portions of our world in more sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices. Justina, maybe I'll ping to you if there's any particular fund structure and what that looks like for a client that you think is representative and would be useful here.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, I sort of walked through a few. I can't name specific products, but there are several venture capital funds, of course, like Rethink Food. I can mention that one since Rini's on this call. But there are several others that are focused specifically on sustainable food and agriculture. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those opportunities. I think for those who are less able to access those kinds of opportunities, I did mention that there are thematic public equity funds. So look for your sustainable thematic public equity funds that have food and ag as one of the themes that they pursue. I mentioned that within real assets, there are several vehicles focused on shifting, providing either mortgages or leases to farmers in order to shift from conventional to organic or regenerative practices. There are also several managers that own the land themselves. So rather than sort of like lease it out or mortgage it or provide mortgages, who are sort of purchasing the land and converting it themselves. So I would say, unfortunately, I can't name names, but there are several really great resources available too publicly. So CapShift has produced a report that I would encourage you to take a look at. There's an organization called Slow Money that has been investing in this space for a very long time, and they've produced a number of different reports. And then there have been others. Others available that do actually list product.
Thanks, Justina, and appreciate the plug for the CapShift paper on investing in sustainable and regenerative food and agriculture systems. Rini, any that you want to profile yourself?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm not allowed to name names of companies, but what I will say is that in the regenerative world, there's been a heavy focus on trying to replace chemical fertilizers for a whole host of reasons. They strip the soil, they leach into the water. Due to the Russia-Ukraine war and the invasion of Ukraine, there's been limitations of access to one of the major inputs to fertilizers. That's caused the price to spike. And the solutions that we have seen are that are better for the planet are now proving to be just as good. This is not a company we're invested in, but there was just a public announcement that Pivot Bio, which makes biological fertilizers, just reached 100 million in revenue. We had, which is a landmark for a new technology. It's still early days, but that means that farmers are willing to swap out some percentage, 10, 20, 30% of their chemical fertilizer and use Pivot Bio, and they're yielding well. And what we're also seeing is that, for example, when we had the floods in California, the farmers that had regenerative practices fared much better because basically the rain washed away all of the chemical inputs. Whereas if you had a natural input, a biologic, a mycelium structure, whatever it might be, you had tremendous downside mitigation. So I think we're really starting to see the benefits of making these choices. And as Justina said, there are these great funds out there that are helping farmers go through the transition, which takes a little bit of time and money. But we are seeing incredible evidence that it is profitable and it is worth it.
Another useful framework, maybe the funds and sustainable practices that help are less damaging to our biological and systems, that are less damaging to soil, that are less emitting for climate change and sort of mitigating the damage of conventional agricultural practices, but then also the practices that are more resilient to the effects of a changing climate, to effects of deteriorating soil, like you were just mentioning, Rini, that are positioned to be more and more relevant as we see the effects of climate shocks and a changing climate, that we're developing more sustainable agricultural practices that are going to thrive in what the world looks like tomorrow and 10 years from now. We'll dig a little deeper into, with both of you actually, just backwards looking. If you could talk a little bit about, as you think about measuring success in your own practices, whether it's managing a fund, managing portfolios and building portfolios, success stories, lessons learned over your journeys thus far, how you know when you're succeeding or not. Maybe I'll start with you, Justina.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for us, success starts with meeting our clients' goals. And so I would say that's sort of the primary success metric. But of course, for each individual investment, we're thinking about what we're trying to achieve as well. And so, you know, really what we can consider to be success is if we are adhering to sort of the original theory of change of the investment. So both from a financial as well as an impact standpoint, you know, did we do our work correctly and well to really execute on that theory of change? And, you know, not everything always works out the way that you expect it to, but making sure that we're good partners to our managers as well as to our clients to sort of understand, you know, if things aren't working out the way expected, you know, what kind of pivots make the most sense, and what is the approach that the manager is taking to sort of to continue to sort of manage that portfolio well and through any challenges. And so, you know, we're really looking for those opportunities where the impact and the financial outcomes are inextricably linked, and therefore, you know, our managers are, you know, fully incentivized both from an impact and a financial standpoint, and are not only incentivized but fully committed and aligned with our goals and our clients' goals.
Great. Rini, how do you think about measuring success of your portfolio?
We're always looking for market returns, and we hope to do much better than that. But for us, success really looks like returns for our portfolio that also mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And so we take a 30-year out view because our companies are young, and we're usually investing at a point where they're not in market doing something that is actually executing on their goals of climate change yet, but they're right at the cusp. We invest after technology risk, and we really assume scale risk with our companies. And we think about how in 30 years, how much greenhouse gas emission will they mitigate? How much greenhouse gas emission will they potentially remove? And to us, success looks like whether or not they're going on that journey and whether or not they're doing it with market rate returns.
I think that journey is being carried forward certainly resonates. I think at CapShift, we try to link our impact measurement to our impact forecasting or impact due diligence, really. So when we're doing diligence on a particular fund or direct investment, really trying to be rigorous about what are the outcomes that we expect this underlying investment to be able to generate, and why do they matter? Why do we care? How are they impactful for people or planet? And then subsequently checking in, right? Not in an adversarial way, but to say, are our priors being validated by the outcomes that the fund is being generated? And we share that, you know, loudly and transparently through annual impact reporting that says, this is what this fund set out to do, and this is where they are on this journey, or this is what this company set out to do, and these are the outcomes that they're able to take. And that brings, you know, lessons learned for us as we think about subsequent due diligence and where are we seeing our expectations met or not, where can our capital be our clients' capital be most additional in these different types of outcomes. I'll use that to transition to one of our last questions. Any success stories that you'd share I'll go back to you again, Justina, for portfolios that you've built, outcomes that you've generated, happy clients, as you mentioned, as the sort of core. Any particular journeys that resonate when you think of success in investing in sustainable food and ag?
Well, I think, I mean, as you just said, the word journey, I think it is an ongoing journey. So we never want to sort of rest on our laurels and think that our work is ever done. But yeah, absolutely. I think, our clients have been excited about our ability to bring these opportunities to them, to be able to build, well-diversified portfolios that incorporate this theme within them, and really, to work with managers that are fully committed and dedicated to this. And I think, Jesse, similar to what you just articulated, we also, engage with our managers very formally in managing our portfolios. So in the same way that we manage our portfolios for sort of the financial aspects of it, we also manage our portfolios for better and deeper impact over time. And I think that's valuable to the investment strategies and managers that we work with, as well as to our clients. And so from our perspective, it's sort of not necessarily where you start or even where we are now, but really what we're all working towards together.
And I'll give an example of a success, or so far success story in our portfolio. We invested in a company called Grow Intelligence, which I would describe as the Bloomberg of agriculture and climate. And at the beginning, you looked at what they were doing and thought, okay, they're digitizing all this great data. They're going to provide predictive analytics. Who's going to use it? How are we going to use it? Will it be used efficiently? Is there a use case? And we are seeing companies, Fortune 50 companies, governments, research institutions, banks use this data to be able to look out instead of months or a year, a decade, and make decisions that will allow the company to smartly navigate the impact of climate change, because 2 degrees impacts basically the global supply chain. There is nothing that will go untouched, and that has economic risk. And now that we have been able to identify that, we're able to act to protect against those changes. But with the advent of digitization and data and information, it just brings the need for more data. So we're seeing this very virtuous cycle. So I would describe that very much as a success story.
That's great. Thanks. So last question, after going backwards, looking forward, any forecasts for us of what you expect this space to look like in 10 or more years down the road, developments you're looking forward to, product you want to see in the market, any other directions you want to go there? I feel like I start with you every time, Justina, so I'm just going to pass right back to you, Rini.
Oh, wait, is it me? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to give my hope and dream, which is carbon accounting and a carbon tax. I would love to see a world, and I think this will ultimately happen, where we are able to assign a economic value to how the negative and the positive implications of businesses on a scope 3 level. And for those who don't know, scope 3 is basically 2 degrees of separation of what you touch, carbon footprint.
Justina?
I was going to say something very similar, which is the forced internalization of the negative and positive externalities that are generating. So, and I would go beyond sort of carbon emissions, but really think about the social cost of carbon, and the impact on livelihoods, the impact on justice, that the way in which we are living so unsustainably currently has on people and planet. So I would say sort of the forced internalization of those negative externalities, such that businesses are forced to reflect the true cost of conducting that business, so that we value all of those needs, goods, and services properly, and value the ecosystem services that are provided by this planet properly. I mean, that's not going to happen in 10 years, but we can always hope.
Absolutely. I mean, if
please.
we knew the true cost of sugary beverages or ultra processed foods on healthcare, I think it would be much more expensive to buy, chips and soda.
I might add, looking at the past 10 years, so many of the opportunities that we've discussed on today's call were developed in the last 10 years, right? 10 years ago, we had a tiny fraction of the opportunities to invest across market rate returns, catalytic impact first capital, across asset classes, subsectors, and beneficiaries. And so I'm hopeful that through webinars like this and the work that we're doing, that becomes apparent. I think it's only just dawning on asset holders and the advisors, the stewards of investment capital, just the wealth of opportunity that's out there. So I hope that becomes much better known, and we see 10x, 100x of the capital flowing to these solutions, which is what the challenges these solutions are optimized for need, and what these opportunities are able to absorb. So with that, thank you, Justina and Rini. I will pass it back to Isabel to close us out.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. This was a great and special conversation that we had. Really, really interesting topic. Special thanks to our sponsor, CapShift, and to Rini, Justina, and Jesse for the amazing discussion. I'm pretty sure the audience is thrilled. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.